cool breeze drifts across Flora Isle, mingling the sweet scent of flowers with the salty tang of the Lucidian Ocean. Well-tanned locals play on the beach, while sunbathed visitors visiting sit in wicker chairs and sip cold drinks. Half a dozen half-naked shark hunters are preparing to compete in the annual tournament. They are standing in the shallows of the south shore, armed with just harpoons and their own wits. The sky is blue, the sun is high. The sound of waves gently lapping on the seashore, jovial banter, seagulls flying overhead, and the soft hum of meats and vegetables frying on open-air stoves are the orchestra of today. Flora Isle is connected to the mainland by a single bridge, cutting it off from the hustle and bustle of the main port city of Palma Flora. This makes it the perfect place for its residents, tourists and adventurers to kick back and relax. We begin to focus on one such group, a tired group of adventurers weary from their recent exploits in the underground catacombs beneath the ancient city of Port de Mali. Unfurling their wares and removing armour, the exhausted party are getting ready for a relaxing afternoon on Flora Isle's white shores, taking in the island's famous, relaxing atmosphere. This was the introduction to a game of Dungeons & Dragons I ran recently for my friends, setting the scene for the adventure that they were about to embark on. The opening lines are lifted from a scenario from the D&D module book Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, but I wanted to take it one step further. I wanted to set the tone perfectly for my players, to whisk them away to a tropical island with the promise of a relaxing time and playful antics, secretly knowing that the session would soon go to shit as I unleashed my plans for several encounters with monstrous beings of briny depths that threatened to undo the sanctity and peacefulness of the island. The players had come to the session having designed their characters and invented intriguing backstories, with me, the Dungeon Master, or DM for short, serving as the weaver of the tale. At their best, Dungeons & Dragons sessions can be an innovative and experimental workshop, warping game and storytelling together in a unique narrative experience that is dictated by a mixture of acting, math, players' whims, and random rolls of the dice. As a lifelong fan of narrative storytelling and gaming, Dungeons & Dragons and the tabletop RPG phenomena at large is the perfect mixture of acting and playing. A sweet spot on the nerd Venn diagram, so to speak. As such, I want to share my experiences with a hobby that has helped to boost my confidence, improve my skills as a player, a creator, and a storyteller, and to explore a medium that has helped me to bring me closer to people that I care most about, and gave me a platform to work through my own emotional issues. Over the course of this series, I want to introduce new players to a wide variety of different gaming systems to try and ease people into taking those first initial steps into a larger world. I want to highlight the popular systems as well as little known ones. I want to help both new and more experienced players design characters, offering my own personal experience and advice. I want to offer my own takes on new products and how they affect our favourite games. I want to tell stories from my time on the tabletop itself. I want to engage players in important discussions about what our favourite games do right and sometimes not so right. And I want to construct a large narrative on how tabletop role-playing games are swiftly becoming a dominant force in popular culture. Welcome to RPG Matters. Since the wider zeitgeist has decided that tabletop role-playing is cool now, I want to spend this introductory episode explaining why I love this particular type of game, to perhaps entice new players into this world, and to perhaps reignite the love of more experienced players. Permit me, if you will, to discuss my own experiences with gaming up until this point. Tabletop gaming has always been a huge part of my life, whether playing board games as a child, and eventually as an adult, collecting and painting Warhammer and Middle-earth strategy battle game models as a teen, or battling out with my friends in university with card games such as Magic the Gathering. I've always been fascinated by games that are removed from the computer or video game console. My interest in tabletop role-playing really began when I was 13 years old, and my uncle gifted me with a Dungeon Master's Guide, a player's handbook, and accompanying oddly shaped dice for Dungeons & Dragons version 3.5. My uncle would regale me with the funny and wacky adventures that him and his pal would get up to in the 1980s, playing older versions of this game. Unfurling the pages of these precious tomes was like stepping into a larger, more complex world. I grew up mostly playing RPG games on video game consoles, whether through the more action-orientated Legend of Zelda series to the more complex turn-based Final Fantasy series. But for the first time with these books, I could identify how one breaks down these elements to see the internal game design choices and also crafting narrative beats. And better yet, a game and a story you could influence. I spent hours poring over the rules, illustrations, and potential for stories that I could tell, but never quite had a group of friends interested enough to make the jump. These books would remain on my shelf for years, my inner self knowing the amount of untapped potential at my fingertips. That potential finally came when I went to university, swiftly joining a society dedicated to tabletop gaming. It was there I first played games such as Pathfinder, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and an RPG take on the cult series Firefly. I was also given a taste of the dark and brooding Vampire the Masquerade, though it was a while before I decided to take the leap into the gothic and sultry game. Post-university saw a dwindling of games played, but with the advent of online tools such as Roll20, I now enjoy a stable group of friends who roleplay together online, sometimes twice a week, playing games such as our long-running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign, and indie titles such as Urban Shadows, Fiasco, and Scum and Villainy. So now that you're caught up with me, I think it's time to get back to the topic of this episode. Why do I love playing tabletop role-playing games? What is it that gets me excited time and time again when I need to think about a new character for a new campaign, or what fun narrative beats that I can come up with for my players to endure? I think for me, a huge part of it is expression. With the right GM, aka the Game Master, the sort of character you can play is only limited by your own imagination. For completely new players, the concept is as simple as working with the Game Master on a character that makes you excited and want to play in the game. For me, each new character I make is a chance to express a different facet of me. It represents the opportunity to invent a new and interesting personality that can not only stand on their own, but also to intermingle with the other players. I get genuinely excited when I think about or hear about the other types of characters the players will be controlling, or how I'm going to react to them. It becomes a complex web that is established through role-playing and sometimes rolls of the dice. Plus, I do feel role-playing characters is a healthy way of working through one's own personal issues and mental health problems. I know that I've embedded a lot of my own insecurities into my characters, and I know a lot of people do the same. It's a healthy way of working through issues or talking about something where you might not necessarily want to kind of go into it in real life, but by role-playing a character, you're able to express yourself. And for people crafting the stories that their adventurers or characters will be embarking on, it represents a unique opportunity to craft a narrative and a world that interacts with gameplay mechanics, creating stories and scenarios that one hopes sticks with the players long after the session is over. This is your chance to be Shigeru Miyamoto and J.R.R. Tolkien all rolled into one. And a huge part of it as well is the different sorts of systems that you can play with. I like to try as many different systems as possible because I like to see how different games work and how character creation is done in a different way, and it kind of just gives me the chance to explore this huge vast world which is tabletop role-playing games. A lot of the times I like to play in games which are more fantasy inspired, like Dungeons and Dragons, but sometimes I also like playing in games where it's a pre-established universe. There's loads of different RPGs that most popular franchises you can think of will have a form of some sort of RPG game. I've recently played in the Star Wars one, which is a lot of fun. It's a really interesting system, and as long as you've got a group of friends who are willing to kind of embark on that with you, then it's kind of exciting to try different games and see how they do it. But what I would say is if this is your first time role-playing, I would stick with one system for a bit. Get to know that system, get to know the beats of making a character and kind of how the games work, and then from there you can perhaps start to explore other games, which again I'd recommend to anyone because there's so much resource out there and entertainment out there. To start off with something like Dungeons and Dragons, which has got a lot written about it. There's a lot of series you could watch, such as Critical Role, and you can kind of get a feeling of the game and it'll help to improve you as a player. So I would probably start off with one of the more popular ones if you can. The flip side is that I kind of got back into playing role-playing games kind of after university by playing an indie game called Dungeon World, which really put an emphasis on characters and interacting and playing as your character as opposed to the more combat heavy Dungeons and Dragons. So a huge part really just does depend on your playgroup. This is another element that fascinates me about tabletop role-playing games, and it's the narrative side. It's your story, and the other players as well, with the game master manipulating behind the scenes but also working to push that story along. You together all craft a story. In a way, it's not like a novel or a comic book or a video game where, by and large, the outcome is set. With tabletop RPGs, the plot really could go anywhere. The example I like to use best to exemplify this is with Critical Role's second campaign, the series arguably being the most popular D&D related show on the internet, in which nerdy ass voice actors livestream their games. Light spoilers here, but the series for the first 40 episodes or so follows the misadventures of a group of lovable misfits coming together to become a surrogate family as they raid dungeons, defeat evil monsters and help people. However, a poorly planned encounter by the players and some truly bad dice rolls saw them commandeer a ship and temporarily fall into a life of high sea as pirates. Anything can change at the drop of a hat. And for the most part, there is no right way to play tabletop role-playing games. As long as it makes sense for the character, there shouldn't be a fear of people messing things up. This is simply part of exploring a narrative which isn't set. There may be a more logical way to complete a challenge that makes sense to the player, but what does the character think? And I think this is the crucial thing that distinguishes tabletop RPGs from video games. I know that there are branching narratives in some video games, but for the most part, they lead to roughly similar conclusions, just with a different path to get there. Really, anything can happen in tabletop RPGs. A lousy dice roll from a player and a mighty high one from a game master could spell the end of that character. Or a great dice roll from a player could spell the end of the game master's plans. It's like improv theatre with math wrapped around the game. There's an excitement at the start of every session about where the narrative could go. While most of my role-playing time these days is spent online, playing through Roll20 and chatting through Discord, there is something to be said that, under most circumstances, tabletop role-playing games are literally just that. Games you play in real life, with other people, often with models and maps. It's just simply an experience which cannot be replicated. You know, whenever me and my kind of play group get together in real life and play a physical game of Dungeons and Dragons, while it narratively and gameplay wise it might be slightly inferior to what we're doing with our long running stuff on Roll20, nothing matches the experience of role playing with your friends, grabbing some dice and just seeing where the adventure takes you. And I feel in an age of increasing digital engagement, there is something to be said about grabbing your friends, switching off your phones, and getting absorbed into an adventure and inhabit a headspace that is not your own for a few hours. And this is really the core of why I love tabletop role-playing games. They're simply fun. With the right group of people, tabletop role-playing games can be a transformative experiences that see friends and family reveling in the art of storytelling and game design. No one needs to be an expert in either field. You don't have to have a master's degree in game design or a creative writing qualification to be good at tabletop role-playing games. As long as you and the player around you are having a good time, that's what matters. Everyone around you should be supportive and allow you to become comfortable over time. no one is immediately going to expect you to roleplay like the cast of Critical Role. Heck, very few people start off as experts. But simply believe in yourself, listen to advice, and allow time to grow into your characters. I know that when I started role-playing with my current gaming group, we all had a tricky time getting used to one another. There was a lot of barriers in place, some of us hadn't spoken to each other in a long time, and there was also the barrier of us being online. We couldn't see each other's faces, we were kind of just face chatting, and it took a little bit for us to become comfortable again with each other, and we're now at a point where we're super comfortable around one another and are supportive to whatever characters we want to experiment with. So don't sweat it if you think your first character is basic. No one's expecting you to create a hugely complex, deep, three-dimensional character right off the bat. It just doesn't happen. Even if you're playing, for example, an elf ranger whose personality is that she's cheeky, that's great. That's something to roll with. You've got your character, you've got your personality, and you can just run with that. And over time you can start to think about, well, how did this elf ranger become a ranger? What led her to take this career path? What makes her cheeky? What's some of the things that she does? And what does that mean for the party? What does that mean for the game? All these questions you can just think about as you are crafting the character and crafting the narrative with the other players and the game master. You know, a lot of the times I will discover a character as I play them. I'm very fond of a character I played in a Dungeons and Dragons game called Ark, and he was an Arakora, who are the bird people in Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't have a massive amount to him at first. I knew I wanted to play him as a bit of a jock. He was looking for a magical object, he wasn't from this dimension, and that was it. I didn't really think about his personality much, and it kind of came out as I played the game and started playing as the character. And it was a case of just working with the game master, and the game master was very open about adding stuff and removing stuff to the background until I got to the character that I wanted to play. Like all things, like all hobbies, a lot of this stuff just takes time and practice. Again, with the right group of people, no one's going to judge you with the character that you play, or good people shouldn't judge you based on the character that you play. They should see this person's eager to play, they want to crack on, and as long as they're playing within what makes sense of the character, then it's all good. So with the sad state of the world at the moment, I think there are volumes of opportunities to explore this fun, crazy subsect of pop culture. And I hope this episode of RPG Matters has ticked some of the boxes for you wanting to try tabletop role-playing games. And I hope for long-term fans perhaps missing their regular gaming group at the moment, that this makes you even more excited to return to the world that you and your friends have crafted together. That's it for this episode of RPG Matters. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this. This is kind of something I've wanted to do for a bit, and a lot of it I kind of just came up with on the whim. I blurted out 2,000 words about why I find this hobby interesting and why I think other people should play it, more why I think everyone should play it. And yeah, hopefully this can be a regular thing. Don't know what the next episode is going to be about, but I've got some stuff in mind. I'd like to maybe do one about designing characters at some point, and I'd like to talk a bit more about some products The Wildman book is out. I've had a little bit of a read of it. I won't mind talking about that for a bit. So, hopefully you've enjoyed. I hope. And maybe I'll see you next time. Bye.